I'm going to say a few words of introduction just about the general programming here and then turn it over to our moderator. So thank you for being here. You may be well familiar already with the wide range of events and activities that the library sponsors under the kind of working rubric of Beyond the Page. And this is one of the events in that series. What we do each year with that series is organize it under a broad theme. And this program is part of, I guess you'd say, a connected series of themes for our fall programming. And it's Music of the Great Migration, a musical, cultural, programmatic exploration of the movement of African Americans to the urban Northeast, Midwest, and West from the American South in the early to mid 20th century. So we are doing a series of events around that major transformational social event of the mid 20th century, and this is one of those. We have sponsoring partners in this series. First and foremost, the Charles L. Blockson African American Collection, and some of you were over there earlier for the opening, I think, of this event. But also the Philadelphia Jazz Project, Ars Nova Workshop, and the Boyer College of Music and Dance, who've been intimately involved in helping us bring together these events, specifically focusing on John Coltrane this fall and celebrating his 90th birthday, right? 90th birthday? 90th. Yeah. The work of these partners has really been critical in shaping the series of programs, and we want to offer a special thanks for the input and advice that Nicole Restaino and my staff have received from Terell Stafford, Director of Jazz Studies and Chair of Instrumental Studies here at Temple's Boyer College. He's also serving as the Artistic Director for a number of events under this series, including a culminating performance by some of our jazz majors, right, I believe at the end of November, right, original compositions. So I hope you'll consider joining us for other programs in the series and other perhaps events not directly in the series but related as we move forward through the fall. Let me urge you then to think about supporting us. If you're interested in our programming, there's I think some materials on your chairs about that, and also information about the other programs. So if you like what we do, you can go to our website, or you can look at those materials and decide to sign on. So now I'm going to introduce to you quickly our panelists and then turn it over to Terell. Today we have with us musicians, educators, and writers on the impact and influence of saxophonist and composer John Coltrane. And Professor Stafford is going to moderate and engage with our guests. The panelists include Tim Warfield, Ben Schachter, I hope I get this name right, Teodross Avery, is that how it's pronounced? And Francis Davis. We're honored that you're here today, and let me turn it over to Terell to get things going. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Well, welcome everyone. What an exciting day. It's been a really exciting semester, especially starting out our semester with a festival that celebrates John Coltrane. And today's been really special for me because the gentleman here at this table I've known for quite a long time, but and every single person on this stage, excluding myself, they have a story to tell about John Coltrane from a musical perspective, from a historical perspective. And we hope that this panel discussion will ask some questions and we'll get things started. But the thing that I enjoy most about having these great people on stage is that they're all educators. They're all great players. They're all dedicated to this music from a historical perspective, from research, but they're all educators and they have a story to tell. And some of the students here get to hear that story all the time. But those who do not get to hear the story of these fabulous people, I hope you enjoy what you hear, and I hope you feel inspired to ask questions if you have them for this wonderful panel. So I would like for the panel to at least introduce themselves to you in a not so terribly explicit way, but enough that we know about you. I'll say some things about them. Francis Davis In case you don't know, he teaches in our jazz program now, he teaches history for the graduate students. And so a lot of undergrads may not have seen Francis because he teaches to the graduate students, but you will see him when you continue your studies at Temple University in the graduate jazz program. So Francis David is a historian, a lecturer, brilliant man. He's written books. He's done everything. And when it comes to John Coltrane, that's the person to go to and ask. The gentleman next to him is the reason why this day today happened on the day it did. He's going to be doing, his name is Teodross Avery, and he's going to be doing at 4:30 in the underground, which is in the Student Activity Center. He will be doing a master class, which is, for those who haven't been to a master class, usually we have a musician come in and speak about their trade, their craft, speak about whatever philosophies they have in music. He's going to do that, but it's going to be centered on John Coltrane. And what I found most intriguing about this demonstration he's going to do is that it's a multimedia presentation, which I think is great from a historical aspect, because there's a lot that you can see and hear that we can't speak about. But also he's going to perform, and I think that's really important when it comes to education, because it's so much of education is not only what we say, but it's what we play. And I think that's the part that everyone needs to embrace. You know, musicians can tell a story. So we welcome Teodross Avery, and officially he just became Dr. Teodross Avery. So the gentleman next to him I've known for a very long time. I've known him so long. I met him my first day here at Temple University in 1996, and I didn't realize that he was a professor at the college. And I heard him play, and I almost resigned because I said, "There's nothing that anyone can teach this young man." Later, I did find out he was a colleague, so I felt that much better. No. But we welcome him back. He went to the West Coast for a little bit and decided there was no place like home. So he's back now, and he's here at Temple with us. And fabulous saxophonist, a fabulous educator, Mr. Ben Schachter. And the gentleman next to me is one of my best friends in life. I've known him for very, very long. When I said to him that I wanted to play jazz, he was the one that said, "I'll show you." So I'm indebted to Tim. I'm indebted to all of the misery he's caused me trying to learn this music. Thank you, Tim. But he's an incredible human being. He's an incredible musician, and I can't even think back to when we met, what year it was, but we were both skinnier and we both had twice as much hair. That's all I can say. So you can use your imagination. So I would like if each of these gentlemen could just tell you a little bit of, just share about yourself, so we at least know where you came from and where you're going and things like that, and then we'll carry on from there. Tim Warfield.
I guess you end up first when you sit next to Terell Stafford. Hello, everybody. How are you? Great. My name is Tim Warfield. I teach here at Temple University. I'm part of the adjunct faculty. I teach jazz studies. What can I say about myself? This is a little awkward. I don't normally do it this way. I usually hand somebody a bio. I was born and raised in York, Pennsylvania. I still live in York, Pennsylvania now. For those of you who don't know where that is, it's about 20 minutes south of Amish country, Lancaster, PA. Everybody asks me, why am I there? For two reasons. Number one, my family is there, and my folks are definitely getting older. I like to be close to them. But the other reason is because it centrally locates me and allows me to work quite a bit, because I live very close to Baltimore and D.C., and then Philly, Washington, Lancaster, and then New York is my hardest hustle. When you're old, you have a long story, so I'm going to try to give the abridged version. I started listening to music through the result of the music that was played in the house, which was my mother and father's favorite, which was jazz music. My father, and my connection to Philadelphia is to my father, who's from West Philadelphia. And so I grew up listening to stories about Peps and the Showboat. I didn't know what they were, but visuals were created even as a little kid. I used to hear all these stories about Lee Morgan and Jimmy Smith and John Coltrane and Shirley Scott from my father. And I somehow got interested in jazz music after going through a bunch of other interests and not doing so well. I've been doing this ever since, and I've been very fortunate I'll just say, to do a lot of recording, as well as I've gotten a chance to play with a lot of really great musicians, and young and old. And that's all I'll say about myself. You can go to timwarfieldmusic.com if you want to really see who I am. Okay.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ben Schachter, and I've been teaching here at Temple. This is my 20th year now, and but I'm still a student. So, you know, that's the best part. You know, is getting to work with the students here and learn as much from them as I impart to them. But I'm from this area, and very much in common with Tim. I was introduced to this music from the time I was a baby, a toddler. Same way. My parents are both from Philadelphia, big jazz fans. I was hearing the stories of Peps and the Showboat and Train and Lee Morgan since before I could talk, and you know, was powerfully affected by that music before I knew what it was. And that's about all they need to know about me. They see me every day. Dr. Avery.
Oh, come on. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here to speak about John Coltrane. I want to thank Terrell for bringing me out. This is really fabulous. I came to Coltrane's music at the age of about 13. Up to that point, I was playing guitar, classical guitar, and then when I heard Train, it just shifted my whole thinking. It was giant steps that just shifted me. Since then, I've always taken it upon myself to be humble towards music because his music was so complex. And even though I went on many travels through pop and hip-hop and all kinds of other music, my root is jazz, and I always came back to it. It was like my rock that I could depend on. And that's the beautiful thing about jazz and about Train's music. I've played with a lot of people. I don't want to tell you about all that. You can just, you know, I mean, it's just, you know, I don't want to grandstand, but, you know, I've played in various styles. But what I found was that Train's music is everlasting, and you can never stop learning about music through his music, because he was always exploring and trying to learn more. So I just try to take that ethos and apply it to my life, whether it's in music or education, and just try to continue with that. And I'm a saxophonist, if I didn't say. That's pretty much.
Hi, I'm Francis Davis, and I've written for a lot of different places. I grew up here in Philadelphia, in Southwest Philadelphia, which I believe you said your father did? Yeah, right, yeah. I grew up at different places in West Philly. You know, I started listening, well, I didn't start listening to jazz till I was around a senior in high school, 17. Before that, the first musical memory that I really have of hearing something and really liking it was Hank Williams and the country singer. And then later, of course, I listened to the radio, and I listened to top 40 stations, and I loved many things there. And I haven't renounced any of that stuff. It was funny. Somebody was asking me the other day if I still like stuff that I liked when I was 20 or 25, and I said, yeah, you know, I had really good taste then, you know, but anyway, I've just added to it. So what happened, I went to a very integrated high school in Southwest Philly. It was John Bartram, very integrated at the time. And it was also kind of the height of the civil rights era, and, you know, it was kind of hip for the white kids to have black friends and hip for the black kids to have white friends, and, you know, you go to each other's parties and things like that. And there was a radio station in town that all my black friends were listening to. It was WHAT-FM, a commercial radio station where you'd hear all sorts of things. You might not hear later, you might not have heard Ascension, for example, but you did hear, like, some Coltrane. And that kind of got its teeth in me. And with Coltrane in particular, I just wanted to say, if I can say it very quickly, I remember, I went to school here at Temple, and I remember going through some sort of emotional crisis over something probably too trivial to even remember now. It was breaking up with a girlfriend or something like that. And you know, or not having the money to pay my rent, whatever. And I remember listening to Meditations, and just reaching some sort of catharsis through meditation and meditations. And I think that could only happen with a certain kind of player like Coltrane. It could only happen with a piece of some length where you had this tension build up and then like a really clear release that you don't get with most jazz, frankly. You don't get it with pop, probably some classical music by its very nature, which is longer. But I mean, that's the vivid memory I have of listening to Coltrane when I was college age.
To jump on what you just said, Francis, if the rest of the panel could just elaborate, if you remember your first thoughts and maybe the first tune or the first feeling, just elaborate on that. When you first heard John Coltrane, what was it that you heard that has inspired you to be who you are today?
Are you asking me?
Yeah, I mean, you've hit on it a little bit, but
okay,
I would like to
the first thing
listen.
I heard, the first thing I remember hearing and really liking was a track called Equinox. And I mean, I can figure out now what I liked about it musically, but it was just so, at the time, I mean, it was just so dark and emotional and forceful. And I bought that album the same day. I heard it on that station, the aforementioned station. And to show you the range of stuff they played, I bought that album the same day I bought Stan Getz, Getz Gilberto with the girl from Ipanema. And I think the only album I had ever bought before then of any sort was Ray Charles, an album where I bought 45s, you know, but an album where all the songs were after women's names, Soul by Starlight and Diane and Hard-Hearted Hannah and stuff like that. It was called Dedicated to You, and I still love that record. And I didn't know that Ray Charles was jazz, for example. I mean, you know, he was a guy who had hits, as far as I was concerned. I didn't know about Hank Crawford and Fathead Newman on his band, but Coltrane really got to me. It's hard to explain why. I mean, there I was between high school and college in the summer, and it was just overwhelming when I first heard him. And I'm pretty sure it was Equinox, or anyway, that was the first one that made an impact on me. From the album Coltrane Sound, by the way, if you want to look it up.
For me, it was Giant Steps. Up to that point, like I said, I was playing classical guitar, so I was playing really tonal music or music that stayed in one key for quite some time. Also pop music. But when I heard Giant Steps, it just deviated from that one key type of thinking. You know, he's going through 4 different keys, but in a different type of way, and a unique way. And so Giant Steps really just rattled me musically, and kind of shook me out of like pop radio as a young kid, because at that point it was what Dad was playing around the house: Jimi Hendrix, Led Zeppelin, Osibisa, you know, very, you know, real West African music, you know, Hugh Masekela, so, you know, real vamp-driven music, and then pop music that was on the radio, and then hip-hop, which was vamp-oriented music too, you know, break beats. So when I heard Train, then it was just like, shoo. And when I heard Giant Steps, and that really shook me, my ears. You know, it was so complex, and it coming through the speakers so fast. You know, at that time, I hadn't heard anyone play any music that fast on an improvisational level. You know, so it was just like, you know, it was just like, what the? You know, it knocked me out, man. I was like, man, you know, I think up to that point, in terms of a soloing instrument, I think the person that I had checked out that was in that area of speed was Van Halen. Like just speed, like just going, like that kind of speed. And then I heard Train, and it was just like, oh man. And then I felt like I had it in, because on guitar I couldn't play fast. Yeah, I play classical style, but when I try to play, you know, the solos, the rock solos, you know, I couldn't get it. But when I heard Train, I was like, I got in. I can get in now, you know. So yeah.
Yeah, it's so interesting to hear Teodross talk about, you know, being immediately affected by Train, coming from a different, you know, musical experience, you know, more groove-oriented stuff, maybe more, you know, pop and whatnot. And my experience was different because I was, I guess, somewhat freakishly always interested in jazz since before I was even conscious that that's what it was, because that was what my parents dug, you know, that was what they grooved to, you know. So I'm pretty sure that the first Coltrane I ever heard was around midnight, you know, from the Miles record. And I also remember that it scared me to death. And I was a kid, you know, but it just really frightened me. And I was used to, like, getting my parents, you know, Cannonball records and dancing to them, you know, because, you know, that music is all, you know, groovy and feels good. But, like, I knew something incredibly profound was being communicated the minute I heard Coltrane. And maybe I was, like, you know, 5 or 6, but I still remember it. And, you know, it's that feeling has never gone away. Every time I hear Coltrane, I have that reaction. I have that response. So that was my initial introduction to the great man.
I'm so old, I really don't remember. And my experience is very much like Ben's. The more I hear him speak, it sounds like we had like a parallel experience. I've always had and still have a very good relationship with my parents. And like Ben, probably from the womb I was listening to something that was jazz music. And so it's really difficult to remember. Whatever it was, it had to do with my father's listening phase at that time, because I was with my father. Whatever he was listening to, I was listening to. So the melody that seems to stick in my head when Terrell first asked the question, I would say, was probably Sita's song flute. And I think the reason being, as a child, just being connected already to so many simple melodies of children's songs, there's something that's very simplistic and strongly singable and recognizable. It's like it's a musical imprint for sure that Train created from that melody that stuck with me. And I just was so impacted by the soulfulness of his playing, as well as the technical ability that he had on the instrument. Even before I realized that I was completely impacted by that. But when I got older and I stayed around that period of Train for quite some time, just listening and making feeble attempts at trying to put things under my fingers. When I got my alto, I'm trying to transcribe Train on alto before I even really knew anything about music. So I would say it was that song, and it was the result of the strength of the melody, actually.
How would you describe Train's impact on you as a musician? Because I've gotten to hear the three of you play, and I've heard and spoken to Francis, and you know, everyone described, you know, the first thing you heard about Train, but how has it affected you as a musician, and what message do you have to tell as a result of how Train has presented himself to you? Tim?
That's a very difficult question, Terrell. Well, first of all, Train has impacted me profoundly, not only from a musical perspective, but from a human perspective, the perspective of humanity. There's something about his sound. We don't really have to talk about anything else. There's something in, I don't even want to say the core, because that's really talking about one specific part of his sound. There's an urgency or an urban shout that when I first heard this, I wanted to immediately be like that, and I wanted to try to have that sort of essence in my voice. Not necessarily going through the daunting task of trying to put all of that proficiency under my fingers, but there was something about the sound that I felt even at an early age really equated to the relevancy of what's happening at the time, like what's going on, and it still to this day clearly parallels with the relevancy of what's happening in society today in terms of like the relationships that we have as human beings, even the proper way to deal with each other. He's written about this content clearly. He wrote A Love Supreme, and all kinds of other compositions that talk about, joy, happiness, and love. But there's still an intensity in it that really impacted me, particularly when I heard A Love Supreme. A Love Supreme really changed my life. And I still listen to it, and I get that exact same feeling.
You're probably going to get very similar responses from all of us, but I mean, obviously, Tim can speak very well to, in addition to what he just so beautifully said, to the inspiration that we derive as saxophonists, and Teodross and Francis with their incredible scholarly work that they've shared with us and continue to share. I've had the privilege of seeing Teodross's multimedia presentation, and it's wonderful. It's really a beautiful thing. They can probably speak to more of the specifics of the things that we all derive from Coltrane, because there's so many and so varied. But if I had to say one thing, it would be that each and every time I hear Coltrane play, I'm reminded why any of us play music at all in the first place. There's something, it expresses that which is inexpressible, it gets us closer to discovering certain truths about those inexpressible things than words can, perhaps, or even other forms of art. It's akin to, Coltrane's legacy to me is that he demonstrated that we can use music, and specifically improvised music, as a very powerful tool for exploring the universe and what the universe means, and is there an order to it, and what is our relationship to it, and all those things that join us all together and join all things together. I know that's a bit flighty sounding, but I really do believe that that is the most powerful thing, in addition to all the incredible music and the example he set for us as a man and as a musician and as a composer and all the things that he did. But I think that's his most far-reaching legacy, is to continually remind us that this music is here for that purpose. In the same way that everyone refers to these types of pursuits in their own way. There are religious ways to refer to it, and scientific, cosmological ways, the physical sciences, philosophy, art. But Coltrane unified all that in the search for an even greater unification, I think. And that's what, not that, I'll ever be able to achieve any smallest measure of that, but there's no harm in trying. And that's Coltrane's message to me.
Coltrane to me is similar to, like, Bird is like this. These are people who were intelligent with or without music, and they just happened to choose music to play. But, Coltrane was at the top of his class in school. If you ever get a chance to listen to Charlie Parker's interview with Paul Desmond, you hear the extreme intelligence of these individuals. For me, that was... it left an impression on me, because up to that point I was very serious about school, and playing music was sort of a casual thing. And then when I learned about Train, I felt like I could bridge the two as a musician and one who seeks knowledge. And so for me, he represents that intellect and music coming together at a high level. And because of the small groups that he played in, he could explore that with at a greater level than someone that, say, arranged or wrote music for a big band. It's a different type of thinking. I think the interplay between his classic quartet and the musicianship and the compositions, I think when he brought all that together, it just kept going higher. I think in a quartet setting or quintet setting, musicians can really explore their intellect within music at a greater level. a quicker level. You know, I mean, it's great to arrange. I'm not putting that down, but I think the interplay, the going back and forth. How you feel about this? Let's trade fours, trade eights. Okay, drums. Okay, trade with the horn. You know, all that. I think that he was just pushing and pushing and pushing. And you listen to those sessions from the Prestige years and what he's doing with Art Taylor and all that musical conversation. I think that was the intellect coming together with music in a strong way. So for me, he represents those two worlds coming together.
Well, I'm not a musician. When I was younger, I sang, but I've never been an instrumentalist. But, you know, I've been thinking about this as listening to everyone else up here talk. And I think, I can't say that Coltrane influenced my writing. I don't know. I'm never that analytical about my own work, so I don't know where things come from. But I think what anybody involved in any form of art could take from Coltrane is not to worry about the audience, not to worry about, not to play down or write down or, I guess, paint down to your audience. Coltrane, when you think of it, it's kind of the most abstract music you can imagine. It's almost mathematical. There's so much going on technically, and yet people that don't understand a thing about that, it still reaches them emotionally. And that's kind of remarkable, and that's maybe the one thing that I could say that I been influenced by Coltrane. You know, I wanted to say something Ben said about Round Midnight on that Miles record. No wonder you were scared. That's one of the most famous entrances in jazz. Miles takes a solo, and then there's this vamp, dun 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 dun. Dun. Yeah, anyway. Presumably, reportedly written by Gil Evans. And then Coltrane comes in, and it's like, you know, it could be scary. Fortunately, I was, you know, a little older when I heard it, so I didn't, but maybe I still got chills. I don't know. And then something, you know, you said, Teodross, the speed of Giant Steps. It's funny, I mean, this is not a major Coltrane record, but he made a record in the 50s for Prestige with a fellow tenor player, Paul Quinichette, who was very much a Lester Young guy. And they're playing something based on, I think it's Exactly Like You or something. It's Mal Waldron did all these variations on standards for the album. But anyway, Quinichette solos first, a very nice solo. Then Coltrane starts, and it's the same tempo, but it's like he's playing twice as fast because he's got twice as many notes in there, you know? And you really have to like think for a second. Well, let me listen to the bass and the drum. No, the tempo is the same. But he's hearing things in terms of like, at least in terms of 16th notes instead of 8th notes. But, you know, so anyway, Coltrane has probably influenced me in ways I don't even realize.
How do you feel, starting with Francis, how do you feel that Coltrane has influenced jazz?
Oh, he kind of reshaped it in his own image. More so than, you know, at the time, the big three in what was beginning to be thought of as avant-garde music were Coltrane, Ornette Coleman, and Cecil Taylor. And Coltrane, by virtue of coming out of a more mainstream setting, I mean, he had paid his dues, and he paid his dues in public. Everybody heard them. With Miles, with Dizzy Gillespie before that, and Johnny Hodges. He just had the seismic effect on jazz. And I think a lot of it, in the immediate aftermath of his death, I was saying yesterday in my class that early jazz was about swing was about getting hot. And then after that, with bop, it became about getting high. And I don't mean just with heroin, I mean, you know, higher intervals of chords and everything. And then with Coltrane, it became getting holy. They're getting in touch at least with some, not a religion necessarily, not a specific religion, but what the theologist Paul Tillich once called ultimate concern, you know, about life and all that. And you heard that in the music after Coltrane's death. The problem was that I think a lot of that stuff, Pharoah Sanders, even Alice Coltrane, as good as it was kind of simplified Coltrane. Because with Coltrane, you had that happening too. You had the vamps and everything. Equinox is a vamp, I guess. But you had this other thing, this technical wizardry, or mastery at least anyway, and this like grand passion and sense of building something and then resolving it. And, it wasn't just a vamp for 20 minutes, with stuff happening over it. And then I think it settled down, and it's still I think the primary strain in jazz. The modal playing that Coltrane did, even if he didn't introduce modes, all of that, even like things that people would criticize, like the length of solos, credit or blame Coltrane for that. Anyway, yeah.
So everyone has spoken so eloquently about, Coltrane's influence and the things that have really impacted each one of you. What I find, maybe you can help me to express this thought that I have in my mind, but with every individual statement, as much as they had in common, there was a message the four of you had about how Coltrane's impacted you. How would you advise the young folks out here who are aspiring to be musicians, and they all have different goals and objectives in their own mind, but if they were to come to you and say, what can you teach me? What do you find the most valuable part of John Coltrane that you feel like can impact my playing as a young person? What would it be from each of you to the young folks out here?
You give me the hard questions first, Terrell. I'll probably go about this in a roundabout way. There are a lot of younger faces in the audience, so some of you may not be able to equate to this, but when I was younger, there was a whole process of listening that is much different than the immediacy that happens now with downloading. So the process was to first find out what was new. It was your job. It wasn't given to you. You had to go find some sort of publication that had this information. Understanding that this was a niche market, it was something like Downbeat or something of that nature. And then what you had to do is you had to then find out who had this for retail and then go get it. That anticipation in itself creates an expectation. And then when you get this, so by the time you get home and get a chance to put it on your record player or phonograph, it's already cherished, man. It's like a new pair of sneakers, You can't wait to wear those suckers out because you're going to be cool, right? So you open up this music, and then you just kind of become enveloped by whatever this idea is. While this is happening and your head is lying next to the speaker, you're reading the liner notes because there's actually a lot of information about the art. It helps you get to the art of what this music is. And you just read this stuff, and you listen, and you read, and you listen, and it's just over and over again. You don't just listen to the recording once. You literally become consumed by what this is. I think that that's probably the most important part of addressing like the art itself of Coltrane. I think the second half, this is much more of a musician's sort of a thing, but people do it all the time, I guess. I've made it a point to actually talk to a lot of older musicians who have interacted with Coltrane because I wanted to know, who is this man? Like, what about him made him want to, or how did he get to this sort of level of artistic success? It wasn't for me to try to access. I just wanted to know who he was. And I spoke to some musicians that you might not necessarily think would be the people to give you the information. Like I spoke with Slide Hampton, and I remember asking him, it's like, okay, you hung out with Train, like what was John Coltrane like? I mean, he was playing all this music. And what I found interesting, and this really made me say this is the direction to go, the quiver in Slide's voice when he said that there's something there's the first thing you need to know about John. John was a very nice man. I thought he was going to cry. It was that, I could tell that John Coltrane had impacted him that much. That changed my whole perspective of who John Coltrane was. And when I started to get this consistently from Benny Golson, from Mickey Roker, from Robert Bootsie Barnes, when I started to get this information consistently, it gave me another perspective. So it's important to really go beyond the art and deal with the person that creates the art. Figure out who they are, and that will give you a true perspective on what you need to do to get to whoever you choose to be.
Yeah, I can, to piggyback onto what Tim just said, I mean, I didn't have the privilege of speaking to people like Sly or such luminaries to ask them about their personal experience with Train. But I already knew, I mean, you know, we all read the biographies and, you know, the great work of people like Francis. I already knew that he was a beautiful human being. And I didn't need to read anything to know that. You can hear it in every note that he plays. It's about love and kindness and beauty and searching. You hear it in everything he plays. Also, to piggyback on to Tim's point, the concept of total immersion in the music is absolutely vital, you know. So, you know, the full experience of, you know, kind of channeling the music once you have taken the time to get a vibe for the kind of human being that was making the music. In addition to all the specific information, technical information, historical information, the context in which it was made. But in addition to that, I would say that, you know, the lesson that you can derive, that I'm still trying to derive from Coltrane's example, is one of diligence to the point of obsession. And that I can say I have, but also clear that Coltrane possessed was a tremendous discipline, which I do not have, but you know, so be it. And I think I guess that's about the only point I wanted to make about that. I'd be just one other thing. I mean, you know, in addition, I mentioned that, you know, when you hear Train, every note you hear, you know, love and beauty and kindness, but you also hear honesty, complete honesty. So you need to, you know, my advice would be, I mean, this is the advice I give myself, you know, no matter what Coltrane recording, for instance, you happen to be referencing, there's no artifice to it whatsoever. There was never any sort of agenda or preconception as to how this might sell or how this might go over. It was for the sake of the art itself, and the art existed for the reasons I tried to, you know, enunciate earlier, you know, in pursuit of this greater understanding. So, and you know, I guess there were some people who would, I've heard, you know, some people make reference to the fact that, for instance, some of the early Impulse records, like the Duke record or the Johnny Hodges record, may have been done for commercial purposes. But all you have to do is listen to it for 1 second and know that that certainly was not the case, because you're on the floor weeping, you know. So it's, you know, I think honesty about why you make music is something that's very important to, you know, be disciplined about. If there's one thing I'm disciplined about, that might be it.
The question was, how can Train's music help them become better musicians, right? Okay, well, I would say to really study your instrument, number one. If you read any of the biographies on him or hear the stories, you know, he would fall asleep with the horn in his mouth, still practicing. You know, that's how serious he was about learning that instrument. You know, he went to music school here and studied with a guy named Dennis Sandoli. He, instead of completing the program in 4 years like most people did with 1 lesson per week, he completed it in 2 years, taking 2 lessons per week. So he was very serious about learning, not only just learning his instrument, but also learning harmony and theory. You know, really taking that seriously. And then also taking the music of his culture seriously, from the Black American experience, the blues. You know, playing, you know, when he played in lounges and he had to relate to the people. You know, whatever your audience is, make sure you can relate to your people. Everyone, but also specifically where you're from. You know, you don't want to be disconnected from that. I think because his parents were preachers, he had that innate way of really talking to the people, you know, and you can talk to your people as well as a broad audience, but make sure that you are understood by the community you come from. You know, he was connected in that way. And then he would take it and he would learn Stravinsky's music and he would learn, you know, Bird's music, you know, Dizzy's music, but it was all serious music to him. You know, so I would say, you know, learn the blues, learn the post-tonal composers, you know. Listen to it at least. You don't have to play everything, but just know of the music, know who Stravinsky is, you know, that because that's all, you know, they were inspired by that music as well as the blues, as well as Bird, you know. Check out astronomy. You know, he read and understood Albert Einstein on a high level, you know. Be able to take different subjects, fuse them together. I always like to think of Coltrane as being more, well, not more, but a scientist of music, because he was checking out Indian classical music, he was checking out the blues, he was checking out Hassan ibn Ali, who's from Philly, the pianist composer, who is a real link when you talk about giant steps and the sheets of sound. He's a part of that, you know. So digging outside of your square, you know, and checking out what he did, you know, and then you can kind of use that template to study what you're studying, you know. But taking it, being very serious about all that, being serious about the blues and really learning the blues. That's very important, you know, because I don't care how, you know, you could hear Train playing Transition, and right in the middle of him going in at, you know, at the 8th minute, you'll hear him play the blues in a real cry, you know, like right in the middle of it, you know, you hear that, you know, right in the middle of it, you're like, whoa. But that's because he took the blues seriously, you know. Also understanding that music that has a feel is as important as music that has technical, you know, depth as well. Feel music is just as important, you know, because he had that feel, you know, playing with all the different people he played with. They had that feel, you know, singing, playing the next Big Maybelle, who's a blues, you know, feel singer. You listen to, go online and check Big Maybelle. You know, she's a feel and a blues singer, but he had that. He stood by her, listened to her, and he got that and brought it into his music. So he was never, as intellectual as he wasn't disconnected from the feel of the community that he was from. So I'd say take it all seriously and then apply it to your own, you know, concept.
Thanks. Well, the question was about how a younger musician, how you tell them, first of all, you'd have to open yourself up to it. I mean, if you come to Coltrane's music, or maybe to anybody's music, with preconceptions about what, you know, jazz should be and so on, you're not going to get it. And that's true with, say, with Art Tatum. I mean, I find, maybe it's because of the recording quality or something, I find students sometimes don't respond to earlier jazz. But, you know, so if you listen to Art Tatum and you think, well, he's playing real fast, and you don't kind of sense or know the harmonic stuff he's doing, it's not going to make much sense to you. Where Coltrane at least has this overwhelming, almost like a physicality as well as a spirituality to it. And that's kind of interesting, too, because from everything I've read about him and everything people have told me, people who knew him, including a girlfriend of his, he was a very shy person. You don't get that on the records, you know, hearing him. No, it's very aggressive. I mean, you know, the other thing I wanted to, I'd say to younger musicians is you know, there used to be an old, and Coltrane figures in this ultimately, there used to be an old joke where a person in New York would stop a cop on the street and say, how do I get to Carnegie Hall? And the cop would say, practice. Well, you know, it maybe helps to be obsessive. You know, Coltrane was obsessive about practicing. Charlie Parker was obsessive about practicing, too. You know, there's the story, probably apocryphal, where he gets gonged, in a sense. A drummer throws the cymbal on the floor. And he goes home and learns to play whatever song it was in every key, just so he can go back again. Well, it takes a certain kind of obsessiveness to do that. And one other thing relating to what Tim was saying about the way it used to be to listen to music. I used to read the liner notes on the bus on the way home. But anyway, it sounds self-serving for me to say, but yeah, you should read. You should read Downbeat. You should read Jazz Times. You should even read the magazines which aren't maybe as good, Jazz Is and so on. Nobody's gonna give this stuff to you as a young musician automatically. And that was true, 50 years ago when Coltrane was alive. I remember listening to that station that I mentioned. You didn't hear Ornette Coleman. I had to read about Ornette Coleman and go out and find his stuff. You didn't hear about Albert Eiler. I had to go out and find his stuff. And even somebody like, I don't remember them playing Bill Evans, for example. I had to go out and buy a record. I'd always be looking for like $1.98 cutouts because they were more affordable. I could get two, instead of one per week. But you have to read. You have to read the stuff. You're not going to find out about it any other way. And also the whole idea of what Tim was talking about when music was harder to get, you didn't just sit at your computer and click on something and download it or stream it. Stravinsky said something close to what you were saying, Tim. He said that you should only hear music once a month, and you should have to walk several miles to get to the hall where it was playing, and then you'd appreciate it. So in a way, we have too much coming at us. But I think people who are going to be artists, people who are going to be great artists, learn or are pre-inclined to focus and become obsessive about what they do and what other people do in relationship to it. And take what you can use from anybody, Oh, one more thing, if I could, I meant to say that I've heard Sonny Rollins once said, and he's an obsessive practicer too. Like he once told me that the thing he hated about being on the road and playing lots of gigs is it cut into his practice time. And I thought, well, you're playing every night, And I could see what he meant. And Odine Pope, a great local tenor player, said something very similar. He said when Max Roach first offered him a gig, he wasn't sure he wanted to take it because he wouldn't be able to stay home and practice if he was on the road with Max. And his wife said, "You're out of your mind. Take the job." But I mean, practice is really important. So, that's what I tell younger musicians. And there was no history of slavery in High Point. But still, it was the segregated South. And someone told me the one movie theater in town where you'd go to see, your weekly movie, your Saturday matinee or something, didn't have what were then called colored bathroom facilities. So you had to either, as somebody put it to me, a friend of Coltrane's growing up, you had to go out in the alley if you needed to go, and in which case you risk not only the cop kind of finding you, but also reporting you to your mother who would kill you, or you could hold it in until you got home. So most of them held it in until they got home. And I mean, I just find that this is what he grew up under. This is so sad, Anyway. Oh, I'm sorry. You need a mic. Okay.
What stories? For me, I just read recently that while Coltrane was on tour with either, what's the guy's name, this alto player, technical wizard, Earl Bostic. He was either on tour with Earl Bostic or Johnny Hodges and got stranded in California. He didn't have money to get back. And this is like 1953, 52, 50, around there. And he met a young Eric Dolphy, and Eric Dolphy gave him the money to get back to the East Coast. And I didn't know that Train knew Eric Dolphy prior to when they played in the 60s. So, and I always had this vision that he kind of took Eric Dolphy under his wing, but then that story changed my mind. Like, Eric Dolphy had it together already. He's like, "Here, man, you need to get back. Here's some money." So, that kind of rattled me a little bit. It shifted my perspective of Eric Dolphy, Because, you always think if someone brought someone in their band that, they were like the elder that, had it together, and the youngin', he didn't have it together, but it was the flip, Yeah, that story shocked me. But then, you know, I think also as we study these great artists, and I think sometimes we put limitations on them as human beings and also their capabilities. I think we do that. I don't know if it's because we're looking at something in the past and we say, oh, you know, it's old music, so we have to come to it with a certain set of rules that we judge it by. But as I've been reading a lot of these biographies, these are extremely intelligent people. I spoke to George Coleman one time. He told me about Lee Morgan. He said Lee Morgan was a child prodigy, played classical trumpet, and I'm not throwing arrows, but he said as good as Wynton. You know, so, you know, as good as Wynton, but it was the 50s, and it wasn't time for a young black American classical trumpet player. So that's why people don't think of him as being that. But I think a lot of times we're judging these great artists by different, you know, we're kind of like through a time. We're looking back at time, and I think in some ways we think that we are, I don't want to say ahead of them, not them as artists, but anybody from that period, like we've advanced. There's kind of like in a lot of people's psyche when they look at these musicians, like we've advanced, you know, this is 2016, you know. But I tell you, a lot of those artists, extremely intelligent. We know they're talented, but their intelligence, the music is just an extension of their intelligence. You know, you listen to, you know, these people, when I listen to music, I particularly am judging your note choices. And I'm thinking about the people at the time who were making music, right? And you think about, say, a lot of the musicians during the time of, say, the 50s, the note choices. For the most part, C6 was the chord, a major chord. People weren't playing a lot of major 7s, 9s. The extensions came with bebop. But these musicians were already going to the extensions and playing. So that, to me, that's an extension of how they thought. And you know, jazz is extremely intelligent music. You know, you have to study a lot of music to get to that point where you can see for what it is. And then we have to remember they were creating that in the moment, and it was different every time they played it. And they were mostly memorizing all of the compositions. This is heavy. It's heavy, man. It's more heavy than we think, you know. And I think that because we are so-called maybe thinking that we're more advanced as a society, I think you can still learn so much from the past and then mix it with what you're doing today. And I think that is the, like when you get to the higher level, when you merge the two, you know. But these guys were heavy guys, and ladies too, just heavy individuals. They're thinking, and it shouldn't be overlooked.
Yep, excellent points from Teodross. I actually think in Coltrane's case, in addition to this prodigious intelligence, which is almost incomprehensible, there's something even more special about the kind of highly evolved human being he was. I kind of think Coltrane might have changed the world if he had been a plumber or an architect or, you know, that kind of special thing. That's a very rare thing. But, and as far as like stories, you know, we've all read the biographies and there are all sorts of great anecdotes and we interpret them as we will. But almost universally we interpret them to mean that Coltrane was a very sensitive and beautiful and loving person. But I can share one particular personal story. Like most of you know that for a brief period of time I moved away from Philadelphia and lived out west for a few years. Kind of lost my mind for a little while, and you know, now I'm back. But I was living in the desert in Arizona for a little while, pretty far outside of Tucson, so it was really like nowhere. And you know, neighbors are kind of far and scattered, you know, an acre away. And you can imagine that the community there was not, they didn't share a lot in common with my experience, you know. So, you know, but you know, you're neighbors and you try and be, you know, open to people, and neighbor lady knocked at the door. She was an elderly woman. And like, we were friendly, but it had already been clear to me that like we were not going to see the world the same way, and no matter what the topic of discussion was. But one day she knocked at the door, and I was listening to music, and of course it was Train. And she came in, and I forget what it was for, borrow the proverbial cup of sugar or ask me to carry something heavy from her car or something like that. And we had already had some minor interactions, discussions where it had been made clear to me that her entire life's philosophy was something that I found, uncomfortable, let's say. And, but nevertheless, she came in and we were having, a cordial conversation. She came in to ask me a favor, but I was listening to Train. I don't remember specifically what it was. Probably something like, After the Rain or Welcome or something like that. And like within a few minutes of her, she was like, jawing away at me. She was like an old cowgirl kind of lady. That was the kind of lady she was. And she just trailed off, stopped talking. What is that music? That's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard in my life. So immediately that music cut right across any perceived boundaries based on life experience or philosophy or what have you. And the truth of it got to her like instantaneously and silenced her. And I thought that was pretty, it validated what I had always felt about the music. So, I think it really does exist.
Well, I don't really have a story, at least a personal story about Coltrane, because I was too young to have seen John Coltrane live. Sadly, I'm not sure I would have been ready intellectually or emotionally to deal with that in person. So I can imagine the impact he had, particularly in smaller venues, on those who had the opportunity to see him. But I can speak, like I said, I had a very close relationship with my father. So I can speak of some stories. I'll just tell one that he told me about Coltrane. Like I said, I've never been to, I know you've heard about the club show, the Showboat and Peps in Philadelphia. There's a bunch, the Blue Note. Well, my father would tell me stories about how he would go in these clubs when he was too young to be in. He'd get like some eyebrow pencil, put it on his, he said he'd get like a hat, a cap, skull cap, pull it down, pull his jacket up, and then he'd go in, and he would just sit in with his, sit in and check out the music with his friends. Well, he told me about one experience that he had with John Coltrane. And this is really talking about the power of John Coltrane, the influence and the power of his music and how it touched people. He was at the Showboat, he said, and he said, the place was packed, and they were playing My Favorite Things. I don't know how many of you have heard My Favorite Thing. How many of you have heard My Favorite Things by John Coltrane? Right, so this van just like do-ding, 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 right? So he says he's watching, and Coltrane is just playing, it's just spewing out all this information out of the soprano. He says, and he found himself going like this. He said, what happened after that was when he realized how he was swaying, he snapped out of it and turned around. He said, and the whole audience was swaying to the music. Then to add icing onto the cake, as McCoy Tyner is taking a solo, there's a hand that goes and taps him on the back, and McCoy jumps. And it's Jimmy Smith, who was so inspired by what was happening at that moment that he felt compelled to come onto the stage and ask could he play. And my dad said that he tore the house down. It was like nothing he had ever heard. On piano? On piano. So that was a story that, one of the many that my father told me that is an imprint that'll be with me even after he's long gone, that I appreciate very much.
I'd just like to say, since Tim mentioned that he's not old enough to see Coltrane, neither am I. Like, when Liebman was here a couple of weeks ago, Terrell said to me, Ben, did you ever see Coltrane play? I'm like, how old do you think I am, man? I'm still, that still hurts. I'm still.
Before he died, so.
I thought we were friends.
We are friends. Well, do we have any quick questions? Because I know we've run really over time, and these gentlemen have given so much and have shared so much with you. And if you have any further questions, we'd welcome them. But I think a lot of questions have been answered. And if you have further questions that they haven't answered, we will honor this question here, and then.
From a non-musician's point of view, I did see Coltrane at the show before. And, I used to listen to my friends who knew more about music than I ever would. To talk about, how they worked to understand some pieces that he was playing. So I thought that was something he could do, and I tried to understand what he was saying in 9 steps. Things like my favorite things. When I concluded, if I closed my eyes and listened to him, I heard him speaking in tongues and colors. And why did I need to really rationally take apart what he was saying when I could just listen to it and let it flow through me and then think about how that felt? So I kind of have to ask the question from that lay perspective. Why isn't that as good?
It is as good.
It is, yeah.
It's an easy one to answer.
Yeah, right.
It's absolutely as good,
Good.
perhaps
Absolutely.
even better.
Yes.
But the problem might be if you are a musician, can you turn off that listening technically? I
That's-
can't answer that
that's
question.
difficult.
But for me, I listen to it exactly the way you're talking about. I find it sometimes hard to read. I find it sometimes hard to read things without mentally editing them.
Being a critic.
Yeah, well, not just being a critic, no, I wouldn't have used that word. I'd use this word, that kind of thing. No, the structure's all wrong.
Yeah.
Too many words in that sentence. So, it might be hard.
Yeah, sometimes.
You guys are the guys who can answer
But
that.
isn't that, I believe that's what he wanted you to get from it. I think that comes out of his background with his father and his grandfather being preachers, that they could speak to regular people on a simple level and get a message across. And I think that was important to him, even in the middle of all the technical wizardry that he had. And that's why you get it, I think.
I agree.
I think that's just as important. I think he wanted it to be important, too. I don't think it was a mistake.
Yeah.
Of course not.
I think he wanted to make sure he could speak to you when he played.
I mean, we all listen critically because we're musicians, but like when at least for me, when I'm listening to Coltrane, that's the one time when it's very easy not to listen critically. It's purely for the transcendent experience, the human experience and beyond. It's, we also study the music, but more often than not, it's very easy for me to experience listening to Coltrane without listening critically.
I think that we all are, I think it's important to understand we're all sitting, next to each other, but we're all very different people with very different experiences, even very different levels or understandings about spirituality and intellect. And the thing that's the beauty of art, music that is art, is that our interpretations or understanding or even what it takes for us to digest it is going to be different. And so we're all going to have an experience. And the whole purpose of art is to share your perspective of that experience, to help have someone have some new insight or different insight. It helps us become better people, I think.
Good afternoon. Question that I have is, you're all musicians up there, and I've had this conversation with my father, who played a little bit of jazz, drumming back in the day. And one of the questions that he always asked me, and we're chopping it up usually, is, what's the key to improvisation?
The key.
The key ain't that easy.
There's a few different keys.
Yeah, there's 12.
Locks.
12 keys to improvisation. I'm not sure that there's any key to improvisation. Maybe if there is, the issue is, I could speak maybe more about artistry, like tapping into yourself. I mean, you're talking about someone like John Coltrane, who was very educated in music, but we could talk about someone who changed the way the guitar was played, like Jimi Hendrix, who I heard couldn't read music. So it's really difficult to try to, I think one of the problems that we have, I think it makes us feel better about ourselves when we can sit down and analyze something and reduce it. But that's really, I can't remember, I shared this in my business and music course, and I can't remember exactly the excerpt. But Schoenberg, Arnold Schoenberg actually talks about this with the critic. It wasn't necessarily just attacking the music critic, but what it was about is how we think, generally speaking. We rarely can get outside of who we are and what we know. So our perspective or our reference point for our understanding is that and only that. And so I think that's where this sort of reducing the idea of what it is becomes an issue. When I think you can just allow something to be, and it's okay. All that matters is that you're able to get to whatever you're able to get to. It's no different than, I'm being a little technical here, Ben's gonna laugh at me as a result of a joke we had earlier, but it's like mouthpieces.
There we go.
You know, it's about mouthpieces. It's like everybody, like some students will ask me, well, what do you think about this or what do you think about that? I think there are mouthpieces that will help you express easier, but it's really about whatever it is that allows you to get to what you're hearing or what you want to try to express. There is no stock idea.
Also, you know, improvisation is not just limited to music. You know, the same improvisational idea or spirit that comes from a dancer is also in a musician. You know, that, which is why back in the day, they'd have those reviews, you know, the musical reviews, and you'd have a dancer, a comedian, a musician, you know, and there was usually an improvisational aspect to what they all did. You know, a comedian can look at this room, check everybody out, and relate to you and improvise based off what they see. Start making fun of people in the audience. You want to kick his butt, right? He's improvising, right? A dancer, I know dancers, they could just come check you out, talk to you a little bit, and then come up with something right at that moment. So I think that spirit of improvisation exists in most, if not all, art, you know, of the arts. It's just whether people want to tap into it or not. Musicians are not special in that regard. There are people, you know, ancient cultures as well as modern cultures who improvise. Folkloric, you know, people who tell tales, you know, there's improvisation in that because you gotta, you know, a lot of times you have to fit the audience at the moment, you know. So I think it's about being fearless and wanting to be vulnerable as an artist to express yourself in the moment and feeling like you want to relate to people and just being open. Whenever you try to put it down and fix it and put it in a box, that's when it stops becoming improvisational. And that's one of the problems that exists in jazz right now, is that people trying to mash it down and say this is what it is, but it's still changing and morphing, you know?
Wow. Chris?
There's been a lot of talk about artistry today, so I was curious if you could speak on the evolution of Coltrane as an artist, going from trying to emulate his heroes and eventually going on to find his own voice, and kind of his journey, his appearance was 12 years before something.
Well, he was on Dexter Gordon in Bird early on. If you listen to Train playing with Dizzy, it sounds like Dexter Gordon. It's really a transitional point, swing, early bebop. But then what, 55, that's when he, you know, with Miles, I think when Miles called him, that's when he started to go into his own and started to leave behind the Dexter sound.
I agree.
55 is when it got, I think when it got serious, you know, those Cookin', Relaxin', those Miles Davis records, Cookin',
Just the record called
Relaxin'.
Miles is really unique sound.
Yeah, That's when he started to get into his own thing, I think.
And that was 55, so yeah.
Yeah, and then after 57, when he got clean, that's when it really started to go down.
But there were other people too, I think, who influenced him who weren't quite as well known. For example, two Philadelphia tenor players. Well, one's a tenor player. Jimmy Oliver, who was the kind of local guy around Philadelphia in the 50s, the guy. And John Glenn was the other, yeah. I think his primary instrument was what, baritone?
Baritone.
But, you know, Coltrane always, I think Coltrane said that John Glenn taught him how to play multiphonics on the horn. But John Glenn would say that he learned it from an alto player who played with Mingus named Sadi Hafti. So there are all these, you know, and then it's important to realize too, I think that, man, the competition was pretty fierce here in Philadelphia. You might not have thought of it as competition, but when Coltrane was coming up, you had, in addition to Jimmy Oliver, you had Benny Golson, you had Bill Barron. Who am I leaving out?
Francis, at what point did John Gilmore move to Philadelphia?
As far as I know, 69 with Sun Ra.
Because I,
Yeah.
interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I don't think he ever lived
So
here before
when
that.
Coltrane must have encountered him in Chicago?
It would have been, yeah, or Chicago or somewhere on the road, yeah, yeah. Most likely Chicago. But I left somebody out, Bill Barron. Jimmy Heath, of course, yeah, right. Anyway, had all those guys plus Jimmy Oliver and plus Coltrane. You had, even before he joined Miles, you know, you could imagine him picking up stuff from all these guys. You know, I think it was Hemingway said that good artists borrow, great artists steal. You know, you take from someone something they're doing that you can use and make your own. And I think he probably did that here too. And also he matured, you know.
We have one last question that's going to be very quick because Teodross has to get over to his master class, which we don't want to run late for that. So if we can ask this very last question, and very quick, yes. Thank you.
I have the answer. Okay. My question, how about the Granoff and Ornstein sort of music? Those are only for the black students?
No, I don't think they were for only for
No, I
black
believe
students.
not,
No.
right?
No, and Ornstein was actually one of the, at the time, in the early part of the 20th century, he was considered on track to be one of the great American composers. He had one piece especially called Death in an Airplane that was very admired, that was revived a bit after September 11th. People started playing it. But no, and then Granoff, I met, this is his first name, Izzy. No, as far as I know, I mean, it wasn't only for black students. These were, yeah, I think so, yeah. Yeah.
Please give our panelists a round of applause. Ben Schachter, Tim Warfield, Teodross Avery, Francis Davis. Thank you to PLA Library. Thank you to the Blockers Collection.